What's up, guys? I'm Nicole Rios, and I've got opinions. I am so happy to be back. It has been busy, and I haven't really had a lot of time to come on and make a pod, but I have been having a lot of ideas. So today, this one I feel very strongly about. My background is in public health globally in a global context. And so I spent a lot of time studying different cultures, studying different health practices within those cultures, and identifying how different cultural norms impact health outcomes. What I've realized through doing that is that there are many cultural practices that we have that deserve to be criticized. And when I say we, I mean the global we. Across all cultures, we all have practices that do harm to the people that live within them. And I think that one of our biggest mistakes is claiming that criticizing a certain cultural practice equals racism. I think that is a nasty cover for being able to actually make change and identify where we're failing when it comes to human rights and global health. And I just want to create a little bit of specificity in what each thing is and why criticizing culture is not racist or racism or bigotry. Uh, and I think that the health lens on this topic really puts it into perspective. So that is going to be my topic today. If you already feel triggered by that, why don't you just turn this off? Because I'm going to be honest and I'm going to be real and I'm going to talk about some things that may be challenging for some people to hear. But again, this is the whole point. Calling out errors or problems in cultural behavior is not racist. And if you do choose to stick around, even if that is a challenging topic for you, I hope that at the end you come away with a different understanding so that we can start having the conversations that really matter, that are really going to change global health, that are really going to change our perspective of being able to have productive, challenging conversations. So I will just say that I have been mind blown with some of the studies that I've been reading in the disparities between certain cultures and their health outcomes related on the cultural practices or the cultural norms. I think that when we start talking about stuff like this, we need to just apply a little bit of definitions in the beginning so that we can all understand what we're talking about. So, the first thing that I think needs to be defined is race. Race is our biological classification. These are immutable characteristics that we cannot change. These are inherited traits, genetic inherited traits, our skin color, our face shape, our features, our stature, even. Certain races can be shorter or taller, more broad, different head shape and size. And they are race is not a social construct. Okay, this is a biological trait-based, genetic-based expression. These are phenotypes. Okay, this is how we look based on our genetic composition. It is something you're born into, you cannot change. Generally, races are going to be black, white, Asian, indigenous. And these are all kind of these qualifications that we fill out on any paperwork, government form, health form, etc. Now, this applies specifically because there are certain medical conditions that are more prevalent within certain race groups than others. For example, sickle cell, okay? That's more prevalent in African Americans than it is in other races. So this, again, this isn't some, out there idea. These are biological facts, okay? Ethnicity is slightly different. Ethnicity is based on a shared cultural identity that sometimes has a relation to a certain race, or we identify a certain ethnicity with a certain phenotype, which is a trait based look. Okay. So, an ethnicity may share ancestry, it might share a language, traditions, and there's nuance to it because there can be people from the same race that have a different ethnicity. Okay. So, for example, a Black African American is not the same as a Black Nigerian. They might have the same race, but they're not the same ethnicity. Another example would be different types of Asian cultures. And so that creates a little bit of variation, whereas Hispanic might describe a race, it's not going to describe the ethnicity, because of, again, the variation of Hispanic subsets. Okay. Culture is a learned and shared system of values, beliefs, behaviors, customs, experiences, life stages. Uh, you know, Most often when we think about culture, we think about what food, what music, what gender norms, even are all under culture. And it's not biological, it's learned, it's taught, it's absorbed, it's practiced. Okay. Based on that, culture is something that can change. I would also argue that culture is very nuanced. And when we talk about certain culture, we can't just say with a broad sweeping brush, American culture or, another country's culture, because there are many subsets within the culture, and not everybody falls into every subset or the grander subset. Okay. Um, this can include, like I said, food and gender roles, work ethic, family structures. For example, there might be some cultures that, like Asian cultures, that prioritize an extended family, prioritize taking care of elders. Reverence towards elders is a cultural norm that we see in Japan and some Asian countries compared to America. We put our elderly into homes and call them boomers and have no respect. Sorry, side note on my my own perspective there. I think that those are some things that we have cultural differences. Uh, and the key takeaway on this is that race is what you are and culture is what you do. Okay. Criticizing what someone does is fundamentally different than attacking who they are. Okay, so that's the premise. Um, I think that America, as a topic, okay, as an example in this uh, talk, is a true case study and how we can be culturally diverse. Okay. We have a million different cultures here now, especially, and we all live under the same country. Now, there are things culturally that I think impact us all. For example, I think, again, I go to health. I think about American culture. It's like across the world, American culture is like McDonald's and Coca-Cola, right? You can go to China and see American culture with a McDonald's and across the globe. Um, so does that mean that our culture is obese? I would say, right? That if that is what our cultural representation is, as far as what the world sees when they see us, is they see fast food and soda, um, then it kind of falls back to how people look here and that we have really high rates of obesity. Um, Another example is that like uh Black African Americans are not going to have the same culture as Black Caribbeans that are living in the United States. There are distinctly different cultures, different practices, different traditions, different music, different food. Okay, so I think that the acknowledgement that we are actually very tolerant of many different cultures is really important. I also think that there is this side note on this, that the more different cultures you put in, the muddier the water is, and the less defined you can make it, and the less uh consensus towards a general expectation of behavior and social norms happens. We don't have as clear of an understanding of what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. We don't have the continuity of language. We don't have the continuity of traditions and practices, holidays even. And those are things that kind of create cultural cohesion. And that is another thing that's really important, especially again when it comes to health outcomes. If we don't all have the same health-seeking behaviors, or we have certain beliefs about practices that might heal, or certain herbs or whatever rituals that we have around childbirth even, these are things that make us culturally different from each other. Okay. Again, this is another reason why culture and race are not the same thing. I can share the same culture with someone who is a different race than me. Okay. Um, and that's fine. We can also have different cultures. Again, fine. So I think that when we're categorizing this in general, we just have to understand there's always going to be a little bit of nuance to it. And I think that when we look at the certain cultural practices or traditions, we have to admit that there is room for criticism. Okay. This is not something that is immutable, that the person cannot change. That's not related to their race. As I said, you can be different races and share the same culture. And so, therefore, if we criticize certain practices or behaviors or beliefs within a culture, it does not make you a racist, because it's not an immutable trait that that person can't choose. It's a behavior or a tradition or a belief that is changeable. Okay. While there might be social norms associated with culture in a greater way than there are social norms associated with race, it still doesn't mean it's racist. Okay. So, just some examples that I think are really important. That in order to ethically criticize a culture, because if we want to actually call things out that are inhumane or that go against human rights, we have to do it in a way that does not create defenses in people. Okay. So this is my Christian heart. You gotta speak truth with love. Okay. We can't attack people because they have a different culture than us that we don't agree with. However, if there are certain things about a culture, like I said, that are dangerous or cause disease or are unhealthy, we need to be able to speak that. Okay. That again, that's not bigotry. It's not oppressor conversation, okay? It's truth. And making sure that we are speaking specifically to the cultural practices and not to wide swaths of people, making sure that we are explaining the harm specifically that's caused by the practice, and making sure that the criticism is applied equally across cultures, that we're not just edging out one certain culture and saying bad, and then not applying that same moral guideline or ethical guideline to other cultures that may be practicing similar traditions or rituals that are causing negative outcomes similarly. And there is also a historical context to a lot of cultures, which needs to be taken into account. I'm not saying it's a scapegoat or a reason not to criticize, but I'm just saying that there are qualifying factors that help you to understand how you've gotten to a certain point. And within those qualifying factors, acknowledgement is necessary in order to validate the current cultural practice and then therefore say why it's wrong with evidence, not just your feelings. Okay. Um, I think that some examples of like valid cultural criticism would have to do with ritual murder or you know, child mutilation or child marriage. Like these are all things that most people can agree not a great practice, don't have long-term positive outcomes for society. Um, and again, as we get deeper into this conversation and I get more specific with examples, we just have to stay grounded in the fact that there is nothing wrong with identifying that there are certain practices in all cultures that have negative outcomes. Okay. I will speak both about my own culture and others because I think it's important to do. But it doesn't make you a bigot to look at some other culture and say that action is wrong. Okay. And it's not racist to do so, again. I think that for a long time, we have lived in a double standard. I think for a long time, especially white people have been told that we are the colonizers, we are the oppressors, we should feel ashamed for where we are in the world. I'm not buying that. I'm very proud of my culture. I'm very proud of where we have come from, what we have done. I just finished, I just finished working with my son on a project for Abraham Lincoln and reading about how against slavery he was and how he literally was the president during the Civil War that broke out because there was this faction of our country that did not want to give up their slaves. Okay. The culture that came out of that and came out of the civil rights movement and came into equality for all, that is something to be proud of. And guess what? A white man precipitated it, okay? So I don't think that there should be any shame for historical context to our cultures, okay? None of us are personally responsible for what somebody did 150 years ago, okay? Even 200 years ago, even 50 years ago. None of us are personally responsible for that, okay? So it's okay for us to acknowledge positives and negatives of all of the outcomes. Um, and the double standard is problematic because it's not ignorance, it's not bias, it's not some high horse self-righteous call out if you're doing it in the way ethical way that I explained, okay? And it creates this like intellectual gatekeeping where only the people on the inside can identify the wrongdoing, but who is doing that? Hardly no one. Okay. So it shields us from the accountability that's necessary for harmful practices. It creates victims within the culture who can't speak out for themselves. And I really think that we're all smarter and more capable of having challenging conversations than being shut down with, you're racist. Okay? We can all admit that there are certain practices, even within our own culture, that are wrong. So I think that the real standard should be like, are you criticizing a practice or a specific person? Are you applying consistent moral reasoning across your criticisms? And are you willing to apply the same critique to your own culture, or are you just pointing the finger outward? I think that criticism is legitimate regardless who's making it, if you meet those metrics, okay? Um, so I think some examples of where cultural criticism is, forbidden and therefore toxic. One great example is gang culture. Okay, we have a lot of gangs in the United States. Some are ours, and some are not. Um, and the reality is that gang culture promotes violence, exploitation, criminal enterprise, drug dealing, gun running. We have certain aspects of our culture and music that support it, and media that supports it, and television shows and everything that make it that dramatize it and make it yeah, alluring. We can all admit that gang culture is toxic, okay? But it's romanticized in our culture, okay? That's something that I would call out. The reality is that when we don't, because it's racist, because there are certain groups of race or ethnicity that are more likely to be involved in gang culture, it undermines the fact that there are all races involved in gangs and that all gang activity has victims. And the culture of gang activity and gang violence and etc. disproportionately creates victims. And when we can't call it out or can't say, hey, this culture is negative or bad because that's racist based on the people who participate, the majority of the people who participate in the gangs, again, we're preventing our culture from being criticized when there are victims in it. Uh, I also think that, for example, female genital mutilation, very horrific. Okay. Especially when we're talking about the age groups of the people who are involved. Um, it's practiced in parts of Africa and Middle Eastern countries, and it causes severe physical and psychological harm to these girls. It's a cultural practice. There's an expectation that this is going to happen. It's known to happen. There's these beliefs around girls and their ability to experience sexual pleasure. And they are mutilated most of the time without any actual, sterile medical environment or anesthesia at all. It's a very traumatic experience. And the Western culture or the Western world is so on their heels when it comes to calling this out and criticizing it. I think that, when it comes down to it, there are certain human rights where we have to stand up for them. And it's also the purpose behind it, okay? That is not ethical. Um, like I mentioned before, I also think that, cultures that practice child marriage, essentially it's pedophilia. Essentially, it's this opportunity to have sexual relationship with a 9-year-old. We know that's wrong. And it doesn't make us racist to call that cultural practice out for what it is. And I think that the line gets blurred many times because there are certain races that participate more often in these cultural practices than others. But we can acknowledge that not all people within a certain race practice that culture or practice that behavior or belief, right? So it's not racist. It's not about the race. It's about the cultural practice that groups of certain races participate in. Okay? But again, the difference between an African American, from here, and a Nigerian, culturally very different. Okay. So I just think that it's important to draw those lines. When you are calling out a cultural practice and it falls under a majority race, it's not racist. Okay. If I am saying there's something about the way that person looks or their traits, okay? Because remember, race is just your phenotype. Race is just what your genetics say you look like. This is my skin tone. This is my eye color. This is my hair type, okay? This is how tall I am, all right? When you go after those things, that's racist. When you go after cultural issues, it's not racist. I'm going to say that like 15 more times during this podcast. So I hope you don't get sick of it because this is my whole fucking point. I think that in the health context, okay, here's where I can draw a really interesting point. Within the health context, like I was saying, America's got McDonald's, baby. That is a huge American cultural icon, as well as Coca-Cola and all of these. You can go to the Philippines and they know exactly what Coke is. You can go all across the world and we are known for these products. Okay. And I just read this morning that 14.9% of 2 to 5 year olds in America are considered obese. I'm going to say this again. 14.9% of 2 year olds to 5 year olds in the United States are considered obese. They're not even alive that long to be eating that many calories to be obese, y'all. Okay? So culturally, that's a huge problem. We're a bunch of fatties in the United States, and it's not healthy. But the whole body positivity movement got us all messed up because I'm not, again, culture. I'm not saying that you obese person are personally terrible. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is the behaviors that you exhibit to get to be obese are creating massive health issues for you. And that should be called out. Is that hating on an obese person? No, it's just admitting the truth that biologically obesity causes a lot of health issues, that biologically obesity comes with many other comorbidities. Okay. That's why the majority of people that died from COVID were obese because it causes major health risks. It's not healthy for the body to have to contain all of that extra weight. Okay. It messes with your hormones, your heart, all of it. You're less active because you're heavier. The whole thing. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. It's terrible. Okay? Now, I'm going to say something similar about another culture, and let's see if you feel triggered by it. Okay? Read this study this last week about women in Arab countries having poor health outcomes because they're not allowed to exercise, because they're not allowed to wear the clothes necessary for exercise, and because there are no there are no gyms or anything for females to exercise. It's not culturally acceptable for them to go jogging down the street or for them to be active in general. Okay. Now, this is leading to much higher negative health outcomes for women in Arab countries. Am I racist for saying that that's a problem? No. It's the same problem we have, just with a different cause. The causal factor is different. We eat shit food and they don't exercise. Still the same negative health outcomes, but it's our cultures that are determining it for us. Now, am I wrong for calling out Arab countries for not allowing women to promote their own health? For calling out the genital mutilation? For calling out the child marriage? No, it's not racist. It's their culture. It's not a race thing. It's the culture. Okay? Now, if that Arab woman came over to the United States and had access to a gym and didn't have to abide by the cultural dress and could do something about her health, did her race change? No, her race didn't change. The culture that she was within changed. Okay? Which allowed her to change her behaviors. And that's the whole point, is that when we criticize culture and call out what's wrong, we allow people to acknowledge and change their behaviors, change who they're hanging around, change what they're listening to, change what they're watching on TV, change their eating behaviors. And that is how culture changes. And that is how we've been manipulated with all of our races in the United States, is by the manipulation of our culture and what we're being told our culture is. Okay? I think that where we get tricky is the intersection between religion and culture. And when it becomes a criticism of a religious practice that is hiding within the culture. Okay? Yeah, for example, the woman exercising, okay, and the child marriage and the female genital mutilation. And I can understand how that intersects. Okay. But for instance, abortion. Okay. abortion in the United States, the people that are pro-abortion have little religious affiliation. Okay. People against abortion do it mostly based on a religious belief. Okay. Now, that does impact our culture. Both are challenging each other for who's going to have the high ground on it. One is argued as women's rights, one is argued as saving life. And I can understand how that becomes a more challenging thing to talk about. Again, we have to go back to the ethical principles. Are you applying the same ethical principle across all of it? Now, I know abortion is a little less related to race, but I think it's a good example. Are you for killing a being, a human? That's what it comes down to. That's the core ethical principle. Okay? If you wouldn't kill your neighbor, then you should be against abortion. Now, when we reframe and rewrite the words and make it different to make it more palatable, that doesn't change the premise. Same with the racism thing. When I criticize a culture and you change the words to make it seem like we're criticizing a race, so you can be called a racist or a bigot or whatever else, it's not, it's changing the premise. Okay? And I think that is really interesting because if we were self-deprecating and criticizing ourselves, nobody would do that. Nobody would change it up. But it's the second that we try and call something out in somebody else. And again, I think that's why it's really important to go back to that framework that I was talking about. Is it about a person or is it about a practice? Is it something that that person can change or not? Okay. You know what's racist? Making fun of an Asian's eye shape. That's racist as hell. Can they change it? No, they can't change it. Minus surgery. Making fun of or calling out the darkness of someone's skin. Racist. Okay? That doesn't change who they are as a person. Now, if I say culturally the way that someone speaks, with disrespect or slang even. And I say, hey, if you want to get a really good job, you're probably going to have to stop talking in the slang and, cut out some of the cussing and you're going to have to present yourself a little better. Is that racist? No, it's the culture in which you're participating in. There are plenty of people in the same race that can have different cultures and present themselves differently and speak differently and behave differently. That's not racist. Now, if a certain culture falls under a subset of a certain race, again, that's the culture. It's not the race. And again, the highlight here is there's nuance within all of it. Okay. But I'm getting really tired of being called a racist for calling out cultural practices in certain groups of people that are damaging or negative or harmful. And I think that the Arab women is the perfect example. They are having such negative health outcomes because of their inability to be active, leave the house. And that doesn't make me racist to say that's wrong. Now, what I don't think is necessary is saying, oh, everybody has to do it my way in order to be right. That's not what I'm saying either. There's no, imperialist, oh, this is the only way to do it. But again, it comes back to how are we ethically applying the expectation? I think that in general, we could all agree on some general human rights. I mean, most of the time when we call something out, it's based on a humanitarian practice. And I'm getting really tired of being called a racist for saying that people should not have child marriage. Pedophilia is illegal here, okay? And if somebody wants to come here and practice their culture that is, under the guise of religion, and it goes against our laws, it is not racist or bigotry to call it out and say no. It's common decency. It's admitting that ethically this is wrong. And the cover and the shroud of just calling it racist, it's again, it's intellectually dishonest. It's the most rancid scapegoat for calling out actual issues. And again, like I said, there is tact. It needs to be done with tact. Okay. It's not a spewing hate type of thing, but that is how it's being categorized. Even when it's done with ethical and moral guidelines. Okay. And honestly, I think about when I think about this, this is what triggered this podcast for me was the Randy Fine tweet, okay, about if they make us choose, we're choosing our dogs, okay? Because culturally, perfect example, y'all. Culturally, Muslims do not like dogs, okay? Most Arab nations actually don't like dogs. They're seen as dirty, they're unclean, it's haram, it's ugh, disgusting, okay? And especially indoor dogs. They don't want to live next to them. They don't want them around them. They shy away on the street. I live in a mostly Muslim and Middle Eastern community. Okay. When I walk my dog on the street, on the sidewalk, and somebody else is walking towards me, they'll cross the road. They will not walk near me with the dog. I have a 9-pound cavapoo. Okay. They won't meet my eye. I'll smile, say good morning. They'll shy away. If she gets excited and her tail starts wagging, she tries to go near them. They jump back like she's a lion. Okay. Again, fine. That's your culture. That's your culture. But when you want to come here, where our culture is a dog loving culture, and we, for since the beginning of time, have domesticated canines, where Lassie was one of the first televised shows. The contribution of dogs to our world. Okay, we have police dogs, we have mountain dogs that save people from avalanches, we have drug sniffing dogs, we have cadaver dogs. Listen, we dogs are part of our culture. Snoopy, like I said, Lassie. This is our culture, y'all. Okay, Clifford. And when some other culture comes in and says, the whole premise of the Randy Fine quote was in response to a Palestinian activist saying that New York has come to Islam. And the next step is to ban inside dogs. Okay, listen. That's fine if it's your culture, but our culture exists here. We're in our country where our culture is important to us. And the reality is that your beliefs about dogs being haram or being, they kill them in the streets, y'all. They just shoot them, random dogs. They torture dogs in the streets sometimes. And again, I'm not trying to create blanket statements, but again, most Muslims do not like dogs. Not even Muslims, just Middle Easterners. Okay. And I think that in general, it has to relate with the fact that they have a lot of strays there, and dogs there are dirty and fleas and the whole thing. And they can be vicious and they can bite and the whole thing. I get it. So that's what I'm saying. That environment created that culture. Okay. Now, that's not the same here. We love our dogs. We bathe them and get them groomed and put pretty collars on them and, dress them up even sometimes. Okay. It's not the same situation, but their culture is informed by that history of stray dogs being mangy and fleas and diseases and XYZ. And so it builds a cultural perception that dogs are unclean and unhealthy to have in a home, which is reasonable. Okay. But when you come and you try to impose your culture in our country, whose culture says dogs are a man's best friend, Randy Fine saying, hey, man, our culture in America is going to supersede your intention to put your culture on our culture in America. Period. It is not racist. And the fact that so many people manufactured outrage to come after this man. Now, I am not giving any credibility to anything else he said. I'm speaking specifically to this one comment. Okay? It is not racist. He was not comparing Muslims to dogs. He was saying, if you are going to come in here and say, we're getting rid of your dogs, we're going to get rid of you. You can't take Americans' dogs from us. That is our culture. You are not going to come in from another country and impose your culture on us because it doesn't make you feel comfortable or you don't like it. Guess what? There's plenty of things about American culture that I don't like. I don't like the fact that pot can be smoked on the street and everywhere stinks. Do I have the right to go tell somebody you can't smoke that? No, I don't. I don't have that right. They get to make that choice for themselves. And if it's against the law where they are, guess what? That's up to the police to come do something about it. Period. And that's the point, okay? Would it make me racist to say that about smoking pot? No. It's just because the person who's participating in the culture has a certain skin tone or looks a certain way that the blanket of racism can be thrown across it. Now, for instance, some Indians feel the same way. Okay? Let's take it even further. The sacred cow. Okay? Indians don't eat beef. Some. Okay, again, generalities. Because cows are sacred. Now, if a bunch of Indians came over here and demanded that we stop serving beef in restaurants, and we said, nah, dog, we like steak, are we racist? I'm only saying these things, y'all, so that you can start to think critically about it. Because I'm really tired of it. I'm really tired of being called a racist for defending culture. I'm really tired of being called a racist for pointing out things within certain cultures that don't match to our general understanding of ethics and American values. And again, there are many different cultures within a certain border. In America, we have plenty of different cultures. Okay? I can self-criticize, like the McDonald's thing. Okay? But we have to be free to criticize other cultures too, especially in the time of globalization, especially when we have had such an influx of different cultures within our borders. And the reality is that the criticism is of the culture. Okay. Randy Fine did not come out and say, you dirty Muslim or whatever else. Okay. He didn't call out her specifically or comment on her phenotype or her traits or anything that had to do with genetics. What he was commenting on was the culture that does not align with ours. That would cause a real issue if it were actually to come to pass. And the amount of people that screamed racism to that comment, what exactly was racist? You can't tell me. We got to stop changing the words for things. We have to stop creating these blanket attacks on people to make them quiet when they bring up a good point. And we have to start standing up for what we believe in without the fear of being called a racist or being attacked. Okay? Because there are cultural practices that are crazy, that are crazy, that the majority of the human rights world would fight against if it was the race aspect was taken out. If the group of people was not defined and you brought female genital mutilation to the table to a human rights group and you say, hey, is it cool with the human rights groups that little girls like 9, 10 years old bring into a room and they have their clitoris chopped off with an axe? What do you think about that? And you had no context for what race or culture participated in that activity. Can you be objective for 1 minute and tell me that that's cool? Human rights for sure. No. But only when the lens of the race gets put on it is it now racist. Again, even when religion comes into it, you can go ahead and criticize whatever you want, okay? You can criticize, Christians for wanting it to be a traditional family structure. No gay marriage. Okay, fine. Criticize us. That's fine. But that is the difference between your culture and our culture. That's a cultural difference. It's not racist. And again, this whole idea of like the white Christian nationalist movement or whatever, it's like, okay, because most white people are Christian, and then if they are patriotic, that makes them a Christian nationalist, and then that's a terrorist organization. I'm not sure where you're going with that one, but okay. Again, that would be a subset of culture, not specific to the race. Because we've got people like Eminem who live on 8 Mile and they rap and they participate in a completely different culture, but we are the same race. Is it getting there? Wheels spinning? I think that this is really important. I really do because again, that intellectual dishonesty of trying to shut people down by calling them racist or calling them a bigot when they are criticizing a cultural practice needs to stop, or else we are going to lose our values. We are going to lose what is important to us if every time we fight for our culture or what we think is important, or we call something out that's trying to impede on our culture, that's racism. If there is not something specific about somebody personally or a trait that they have that is immutable because of their genotype, their genetics, their traits that show up based on their genetics, it is not racism. What's that, like the 50th time I've said that? Now, if you want to come up with some term that's like hateful towards a certain culture, I don't even know what that is. But, I guess. But again, if it's ethically applied and it's applied equally across all cultures, and the criticism is equally ethically applied across all cultures, again, it's not hateful. And the fact that we have stopped ourselves from being critical of other cultures that are trying to impose on us, or even our own cultures, for the sake of like some victimhood situation, it's nonsense. We've only evolved to where we are and adapted to where we are because we recognize what works and what doesn't. And the second that we start silencing people um, who are talking about what's not working by shaming them, um, we're going to lose it. We're going to lose what's important to us. We're going to lose our values. And that is my major issue, that we have we have culture worth preserving. As much as we have culture worth criticizing, we have culture worth preserving, as does any culture. Okay? The fact that the globe is multicultural makes it beautiful. Okay? I love that I can go and enjoy a different culture's food. I love hearing different languages. I think that that is beautiful. But culture must be cohesive. We must agree on foundational values that are similar so that we can trust each other. That's what it comes down to. In this globalized day and age, if we don't have matching baseline foundational values within our cultures, then we don't have trust and we don't have safety. Okay? And that is why it's important to criticize the negative sides of culture, because we need to come down to deciding, does this culture agree with our core values or not? Again, gang culture in America does not agree with the general core values that the rest of us believe in. Should we have to be afraid that there's going to be a drive-by shooting over some drug money in our neighborhood? No. We all agree that that culture is ridiculous. Maybe not all of us, but most people that have a child sure do and wouldn't want to be around it. And is it racist to move out of that neighborhood to avoid being caught in the middle of gang culture? No. Because like I said, just because gang culture generally goes towards a certain race doesn't mean every person in that race participates in gang culture. So therefore, it's not racist to call it out. Okay? At the end of the day, like I said, it's about cohesive values. What is the foundational value that allows us to trust each other? Value for human life, I would say. Equal rights between genders, I would say. The value of children and their innocence, I would say. Everybody having equal access to education and health, I would say. And guess what, y'all? There are plenty of cultures that do not meet those values. And it's okay to say that. And it's okay to say that, therefore, those cultures don't mix well with ours. Not racist. So I guess that's my final point, is that it's okay to evaluate ethics. It's okay to criticize cultures that don't meet certain ethical standards that we believe in the West or even in America. And it's okay to debate these things. And the second that you try and play the racist card, you're just trying to shut down the debate. And if you can't bring anything intellectual to the table and you don't have a better argument, then you're a racist because you're criticizing a certain aspect of culture, then you're not going to get anywhere and you're going to get plowed over. And the quality of our culture will degrade en masse. And I want my son to grow up in a world where right is right and wrong is wrong. And you don't get called a racist or shamed for calling out what's wrong. And I think that's what it comes down to for me. So I'm going to cut it there. I hope you guys take away something from this. I hope that you can hear my heart and what I'm trying to say and the differentiations that I'm trying to make here. And I hope that for those of you who have felt nervous to criticize culture, I hope that this encourages you and that you become a little more brave. And for those of you who stuck around long enough to listen to me and hear me out and don't agree with what I'm saying, I can understand that, but I also think that maybe a little bit more of an open mind and qualifying what you think is racist with some of the things that I've listed out might help you differentiate between what is and what isn't. Because cultural practices have nothing to do with race. And criticizing a cultural practice is not calling someone out for their immutable characteristics. And it's not saying someone has lesser value than another because of their immutable characteristics. At the end of the day, it's not about a human's value. It's about the ethical nature of their practices and their behaviors. So I will see you soon, guys. I have a an upcoming episode with a new friend that I've met. He is involved in the GOP in Kentucky. He has a lot of interest in the politics of that state, which I am very interested in also, and is a small business owner and just a guy from a rural background. And I think it's going to be a really interesting conversation. So stay tuned for that. I really appreciate you guys hanging around. Like, subscribe, like, share the content if you like it. Um, I'm not trying to make $1 million, but I do think that the message matters. So I appreciate you. Love you guys. We'll see you soon.